Before you continue, Ms. Bondi, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's voice sliced through the chamber like a gavel. I need you to look at something first. The packed hearing room went still. Cameras zoomed in as she held up a thick, sealed envelope, its edges worn from being handled too many times. Across from her, Pam Bondi, poised and polished in her navy suit, blinked once but didn't move. For weeks, she had been the star of cable news, promising to expose undeniable corruption at the highest levels. This was supposed to be her victory lap. Crockett's tone never rose, but something in her calm made the air heavy. Inside this envelope, she said slowly, is information that directly contradicts several claims made under oath. Bondi's lips parted slightly, just a fraction, but enough for the press gallery to notice. Every camera light flared. The committee chair shifted in his seat, suddenly uneasy. Congresswoman, Bondi began, forcing a tight smile. I'm not sure what you're implying. Oh, you're sure? Crockett interrupted softly. Because you signed every one of these documents yourself. She tapped the envelope once against the microphone, a small sound that echoed like thunder. Your own emails, your own words. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Bondi's allies, who moments earlier had been nodding confidently behind her, looked down at their phones. 3 days earlier, Crockett had received an anonymous message from a former associate of Bondi's. It included attachments, memos, transcripts, private communications that told a very different story than the one Bondi had shared with the media. Crockett had spent the next 72 hours confirming every line. She barely slept. And now, here, under oath, she was ready to use them. I'd like to enter these documents into the official record, Crockett said, sliding the envelope toward the clerk. Her hands were steady. Bondi's weren't. The clerk took the envelope. The chair cleared his throat. Ms. Bondi, you may respond. Bondi leaned forward, clasping her hands, trying to recover the steel in her voice. Congresswoman, I've testified truthfully. Any documents you have are being twisted. Crockett leaned in. Then you won't mind if we read them aloud. Silence. The kind that eats every whisper. A young staffer passed Crockett the first printed page. The Congresswoman didn't even look down before speaking. This is an internal memo from your office dated December 12th, marked confidential. It states, quote, no verified evidence supports the claims being made publicly. Would you like to explain that, Ms. Bondi? The witness flinched, barely, but visibly. Around the chamber, the energy shifted. What had begun as a spectacle to validate Bondi's crusade was now a slow unmasking. Crockett pressed on, methodical, relentless. She quoted from transcripts, cross-referenced signatures, displayed timestamps. Each piece landed with precision. Bondi's voice grew quieter. Her earlier confidence, her perfect posture, her rehearsed calm, faltered under the weight of her own words. By the time the 15-minute exchange ended, the once commanding witness sat still, jaw tight, unable to find her rhythm again. Crockett closed her folder, her tone steady and resolute. Truth, she said, doesn't need rehearsing. The gavel struck. The hearing adjourned. Pam Bondi's team rushed her out through a side exit. But the moment was already viral. The look on her face, the envelope in Crockett's hand, the quiet authority of a congresswoman who refused to be intimidated. That afternoon, pundits across networks agreed on one thing. In a chamber long clouded by noise and ego, Jasmine Crockett had reminded America what accountability looked like. Before we proceed, Ms. Bondi, I just need to clarify a few details, said Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her tone measured but unmistakably deliberate. The hearing room hushed. Papers stilled. Even the cameras seemed to pause their quiet whirring. Bondi sat forward in the witness chair, her usual calm composure wrapped around her like armor. Moments earlier, the chairman had praised her commitment to integrity, and the Republican members on the dais nodded along approvingly. Bondi had spoken smoothly, her voice polished with years of media experience. This isn't about politics, she'd said. It's about accountability and the rule of law. But across the table, Crockett's sharp eyes told a different story. Her chief counsel had already given her the nod. The documents in her folder had been verified. What was about to unfold would not be theater. It would be revelation. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, the chairman said. Crockett adjusted her microphone, her expression serene. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, she began evenly. And thank you, Ms. Bondi, for appearing today. I understand public service isn't easy, and I respect anyone willing to engage in oversight. That said, I'd like to clear up a few points before we go deeper. Bondi smiled, confident. Of course, Congresswoman. You've stated, under oath, Crockett continued, that your testimony today is strictly nonpartisan, correct? Absolutely. Bondi replied with a crisp nod. I'm here because I believe in the truth. And you also testified, Crockett went on, that you have no personal or financial stake in the outcome of these hearings? That's correct, Bondi answered smoothly. Good, said Crockett, her voice soft but purposeful. She took a slow breath, then leaned slightly forward. So, Ms. Bondi, are you currently employed by or providing consulting services to any political organization or advocacy group? The question hung in the air. Bondi blinked, her practiced confidence momentarily flickering. I have a few professional contracts, Congresswoman, but none that create a conflict with my testimony. Crockett tilted her head, not breaking eye contact. That wasn't the question. Yes or no? Are you working for or being paid by any political group? Silence. Bondi hesitated, her eyes darting briefly toward her attorney seated behind her. Yes, she finally admitted. I do have a consulting arrangement, but it's not relevant to. Thank you. Crockett cut in, her tone polite but icy. She lifted a single page from the stack in front of her and slid it toward the clerk. Let's mark this for the record. This is a signed contract, dated 3 months ago, between Ms. Bondi and the American Liberty Legal Fund. It authorizes her to, quote, develop and promote legal narratives on issues of election integrity and government misconduct for a payment totaling $400,000. A low murmur rippled through the chamber. Several members exchanged glances. Bondi's smile stiffened. Ms. Bondi, Crockett continued, this agreement was not disclosed in your written testimony, nor mentioned in your opening statement. Why not? Bondi straightened, her tone sharpening. That's a standard contract, Congresswoman. It doesn't influence my work or the facts I've presented here. Crockett didn't respond immediately. She flipped another page from her folder and held it up. Then perhaps you can explain this email exchange from the same client, dated 2 weeks before your testimony, where they thank you for framing the oversight narrative effectively ahead of the hearing. The tension was electric. Bondi's jaw tightened. Crockett continued, calm but unrelenting. And just to confirm, you said earlier you didn't know a Mr. Harrison Wells. I don't recall the name, Bondi said carefully. That's interesting, Crockett replied, sliding another paper across the table. Because according to this document, Mr. Wells signed off on your last invoice. He's listed as the executive director of that same organization paying you. Gasps broke out again. The chairman tapped his gavel lightly, calling for order, but the damage was already done. Crockett leaned back, her tone steady and surgical. So, Ms. Bondi, to summarize, you've testified under oath that you're acting independently, while simultaneously accepting nearly $500,000 from a political organization that benefits directly from the claims you're presenting here. Do I have that right? Bondi opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Crockett waited a beat, then gathered her papers, her composure unshaken. I yield back the remainder of my time. The room erupted in whispers. Even some of Bondi's allies avoided her gaze. In that moment, the balance of the hearing shifted. What began as a routine platform for political theater had become something else entirely. A reminder that truth, when spoken clearly and fearlessly, still has the power to cut through noise and expose what hides behind polished words. Let me be absolutely clear, Ms. Bondi, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett said, her tone precise as a blade. You're telling this committee you've never met Mr. Harrison Wells, the man listed as the principal author of the memorandum you just swore was your key piece of evidence. Bondi shifted in her seat. Congresswoman, there are numerous contributors to my materials. I can't possibly know each one personally, she replied, forcing a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. That would be understandable, Crockett said, leaning forward, if Mr. Wells actually existed. The room erupted into gasps and murmurs. The sound of frantic typing from journalists filled the air. Crockett continued, voice calm but carrying the authority of a closing argument. Our investigative team ran a full verification on every credential listed for Mr. Wells. There's no record of him at any university, agency, or law firm. The phone number attached to his credentials leads to a disconnected line, and the email address you cited bounces every message. In short, there is no Harrison Wells. Bondi's composure cracked. Congresswoman, my team verified every source. If there's a mix-up, it's purely administrative. This isn't a clerical error, Crockett said sharply, lifting a document high enough for the cameras to capture. This is the original draft of your so-called Wells memorandum. It was recovered from your aide's cloud storage under your own account. The audience froze. Reporters leaned forward. The metadata, Crockett continued, shows it was written 6 weeks ago, not in 2020, as you testified. And the author listed is Pamela J. Bondi. A stunned silence swept through the chamber. The chairman's gavel hovered midair. Every camera light turned toward Bondi's pale face. Crockett didn't pause. And to make matters worse, she said, her voice rising just enough to echo across the marble room. The data tables cited in your memorandum don't match any government source you claimed. Not the DOJ, not the FEC, not even the state records. We verified them all. Bondi's jaw clenched. You're twisting this, Congresswoman. My team compiled composite data from. Does your team also fabricate expert identities, Ms. Bondi? Crockett interjected. Bondi slammed a hand against the table. That's an outrageous accusation. The chairman's gavel cracked down. Order. The gentlewoman will maintain decorum. Of course, Mr. Chairman, Crockett replied coolly. I'm simply clarifying why Ms. Bondi submitted a document based on a false identity, an act that, under Title 18, Section 101, qualifies as submission of fraudulent evidence to Congress. The hearing room erupted. Phones buzzed and screens flashed as headlines began spreading across the internet. Bondi hearing explodes after fake source revealed. Bondi's face turned crimson. Mr. Chairman, I request a recess to consult with counsel. Not yet, Crockett said firmly. I still have time remaining, and we haven't even discussed the emails. Bondi froze. What emails? These, Crockett said, sliding a stack of printed correspondence across the table. Communications between you and several political operatives discussing, quote, how to build a narrative strong enough to justify a federal inquiry, regardless of the evidence. The room broke into chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes strobed across Bondi's strained face. Her attorney leaned over, whispering frantically, those are privileged communications. Bondi snapped. Not when they're sent from a state government email account during your tenure as Attorney General. Crockett replied evenly. They were obtained through a lawful public records request. The chairman's gavel pounded again. Order. The committee will come to order. But there was no pulling the moment back. The damage was done. Staffers scrambled between tables, members shouted over each other, and journalists rushed out of the chamber to file breaking stories. Pamela Bondi sat motionless in the center of it all, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the papers in front of her, proof of her own undoing. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett quietly gathered her documents, her calm presence standing in stark contrast to the chaos surrounding her. What had begun as another political performance had ended as something far greater, a rare, unflinching moment of accountability under the blinding light of truth. Mr. Chairman, a voice called out from the Republican side of the dais, slicing through the chaos. Given these new accusations, I move that we recess to allow Ms. Bondi and her counsel time to review the materials presented. The chairman hesitated, gavel poised midair, sweat glinting under the harsh chamber lights. The room was tense, restless. Everyone could feel the weight of what had just happened. The committee, he began, his voice uncertain, will stand in recess for. Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Jasmine Crockett interrupted, her tone firm but controlled. The murmurs stopped instantly. I still have time remaining, she continued, and my remaining questions go directly to sworn statements Ms. Bondi made here today. Cutting this short would deny the committee and the American people the truth they were promised. The chairman froze. Every camera lens turned toward him. He knew the stakes. If he silenced Crockett now, it would look like a cover-up. If he didn't, his party star witness would unravel on national television. After a long, uncomfortable pause, he lowered the gavel. The gentlewoman from Texas may proceed, he said quietly. Crockett gave a small nod. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. She turned back to the witness table, her eyes steady. Ms. Bondi, she began, her voice calm but cutting. Let's be absolutely clear about what's unfolding here. You presented evidence to Congress that appears to be falsified. You attributed it to a person who doesn't exist. You've been compensated nearly $400,000 by a partisan legal foundation. And now, we're discovering the data itself defies reality. Bondi swallowed hard, her voice thin. Congresswoman, I reject that characterization. My intent was. Let me finish, Crockett said, her tone firm but even. Because this goes beyond intent. It goes to credibility and math. Crockett held up one of Bondi's own charts, the paper trembling slightly under the weight of cameras clicking in every direction. Here, in your submission, she said, you state that voter turnout in Fulton County exceeded 312%. Now, Ms. Bondi, can you explain how more than 3 times the number of registered voters managed to cast ballots? That's not a typo. That's statistical impossibility. The audience erupted into a low murmur. Bondi's hand shook as she reached for her water glass, her face pale under the glaring lights. Now, Crockett continued, turning another page with deliberate care. Please look at Exhibit 14 in your materials, the affidavit allegedly signed by Elections Supervisor Maria Gutierrez. Yes, Bondi replied tightly, her voice trembling. That's correct. Crockett paused, letting the silence stretch until the tension became unbearable. Then she said evenly, Ms. Bondi, Maria Gutierrez passed away in 2019. She was not in office at the time your affidavit claims. She couldn't have signed this document. The chamber erupted. Gasps, camera flashes, whispered disbelief. The photojournalists surged forward, capturing the frozen shock on Bondi's face, an image already destined for every morning headline. There must be some mistake, Bondi stammered. My team handled the verification process. So to clarify, Crockett pressed, you're testifying under oath that you did not personally verify the evidence you submitted to Congress? I reviewed the final package, Bondi said weakly. Then either you knowingly submitted false information, Crockett countered, or you were so reckless with the facts that you didn't bother to confirm whether your own witnesses were alive. A stunned silence fell over the Republican side of the dais. The confident posture they had shown earlier now collapsed into uneasy stillness. Bondi's attorney rose abruptly. Mr. Chairman, I object. The Congresswoman is badgering the witness. Crockett didn't flinch. I'm asking legitimate questions about sworn testimony, Mr. Chairman, she said coolly. If holding witnesses accountable is considered badgering, then perhaps this committee needs to revisit why it exists in the first place. The chairman's jaw tightened. His eyes darted between Crockett, Bondi, and the flashing cameras. He knew there was no saving the optics now. Finally, he said, almost under his breath, the witness will answer the question. Bondi looked up, eyes glassy, lips trembling. The words caught in her throat. The once confident prosecutor who had strutted into the chamber ready to indict others now sat cornered by her own contradictions. Jasmine Crockett, calm and unflinching, waited in silence, a silence that said more than any speech could. In that moment, it was clear to everyone in the room that truth, once unearthed, was something no amount of spin could bury again. Pam Bondi drew in a sharp breath, her voice trembling just enough to betray the strain. Congresswoman, if there are inconsistencies in my submission, I take full responsibility. But the larger issues I raised remain legitimate. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. Ms. Bondi, she said, her tone steady but slicing through the air, these aren't inconsistencies. A typo is an inconsistency. A misprint is a mistake. What you've submitted is fabrication, intentional, deliberate, and deceptive. You invented a witness. You cited numbers that are mathematically impossible. And you used the name of a deceased public servant to give your claims legitimacy. Crockett's words landed one by one, each with the weight of finality. The witness table felt smaller now, suffocating. Then Crockett looked toward her staff. And we still haven't addressed the text messages. Bondi's head jerked up. What text messages? Crockett nodded once toward her aide. The lights dimmed slightly, and a large digital screen flickered to life behind the committee dais. A series of text messages appeared in bold white letters against a black background. Pam Bondi, need something stronger for the hearing. The real numbers don't make the case. Unknown contact, then make it sound stronger. Nobody checks details if the story feels right. Pam Bondi, We can't fake sources. That's a line we can't cross. Unknown contact. Relax. Just make it convincing enough for TV. That's what matters. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Phones lit up, cameras flashed, and reporters leaned forward like predators catching scent of blood. The timestamps were visible, dated just 2 weeks before the hearing. Bondi stared at the screen as if the air had been sucked from the room. Her mouth opened, then closed again, words lost. The once unshakable witness now looked small and cornered beneath the glare of her own messages. Ms. Bondi, Crockett said quietly, her tone now lower, but every syllable landing like a verdict. Would you like to amend your earlier testimony, where you stated, under oath, that you did not knowingly submit false information to this committee? Bondi turned slowly toward her attorney, who leaned in, whispering urgently. She nodded once, then faced the microphone again. Her voice was unsteady. On the advice of counsel, she said, I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The room detonated into chaos. Shouts, flashes, and the low hum of reporters dictating to their recorders filled the air. Some lawmakers sat in stunned silence. Others exchanged glances of disbelief. Crockett leaned back slightly in her chair, exhaling quietly, her face calm but unreadable. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply watched, letting the magnitude of the moment speak for itself. The chairman slammed the gavel hard against the desk. This hearing will stand in recess for 1 hour, he declared. His voice shook with frustration, but the declaration felt hollow. The damage was already irreversible. As staffers and members began to move, cameras zeroed in on the 2 women. Bondi, head bowed, hands pressed to her face, and Crockett, composed, gathering her papers with methodical precision. Congresswoman Crockett, when did you first discover the discrepancies? A journalist shouted from across the room. Crockett paused at the edge of the chamber, turning just slightly toward the press corps. This committee's duty is to uncover truth, she said evenly. Today, we did just that. Her words echoed as she stepped into the corridor, flashes bursting around her. Within minutes, the hashtag Bondi Exposed was trending nationwide. News networks interrupted programming for breaking coverage. By evening, every major outlet carried the same headline. Blow up on the Hill. Former AG invokes Fifth amid evidence scandal. Later that night, in her Capitol Hill office, Crockett sat surrounded by glowing screens. News anchors replayed the footage of the hearing on loop. One headline after another scrolled across the monitors. Political earthquake in oversight hearing. Fabricated evidence uncovered. Crockett's cross-examination stuns Congress. Her chief of staff entered, handing her a steaming mug of coffee. CNN just confirmed it, he said. They've independently verified all of our documents. The Justice Department's requesting full access to the committee record. Crockett nodded slowly, exhaustion etched across her face, but resolve still burning in her eyes. And the chairman? She asked. He released a statement about an hour ago, her aide replied. Calls for a further review of the evidence, but he didn't dispute a single fact. Crockett let out a quiet breath, her gaze fixed on the screen replaying Bondi's final moment on the stand. The pale face, the silence before she invoked the Fifth. Truth has a way of finding daylight, she murmured. Outside, Washington buzzed with the fallout. Reporters swarmed sidewalks. Commentators argued over the implications. But inside that small office, Jasmine Crockett sat still, the hum of the city fading behind the glass. For her, it wasn't triumph, it was accountability. And tonight, at least, that was victory enough. Crockett's communications director glanced up from her phone, her expression tight. He just posted the statement, she said. The chairman's calling for a full internal review into Bondi's testimony prep, trying hard to make it look like the committee wasn't complicit. Across the room, screens flickered with endless replays of the day's hearing. The moment Pam Bondi invoked her Fifth Amendment right had become an instant symbol of collapse, a freeze frame repeated across every major network. The confident political operative reduced, in seconds, to a trembling witness before millions. Crockett stood near the window, her reflection overlapping with the image on the monitor. This isn't just one witness gone rogue, she said quietly, her voice carrying across the room. It's coordinated, an effort to deceive Congress. And, worse, the public. She turned, her tone hardening. The question now is how deep it runs. As if on cue, the door opened and her legal counsel stepped in, a thick folder under his arm. "You were right to press it, Jasmine," he said, setting the documents on the table. "We've traced the same funding stream that paid Bondi to at least 3 other witnesses who've testified in recent months. Same donor network, same data manipulation, same script." Crockett's brow furrowed. What had begun as a single confrontation in a hearing room was unfolding into a larger web, a machinery of deception designed to feed Congress false narratives under the guise of expert testimony. Meanwhile, across the city, Pam Bondi sat in her attorney's office, staring at a muted television as her own downfall played out in high definition. Her assistant entered quietly, eyes down. "You should know. America First Legal terminated your contract this morning, and the network's pulling your regular commentary slot, pending review." Bondi didn't respond. She stared out the window, the Washington skyline blurred by rain. How had it all unraveled so fast? The plan had seemed airtight. Deliver persuasive talking points, dominate the news cycle, move on before anyone questioned the details. That formula had worked for years. But not this time. This time, Jasmine Crockett had shown up prepared, with receipts, verified evidence, and the moral clarity to expose it all. Bondi's phone buzzed again. A message from a former ally appeared on screen. "DOJ just opened a preliminary probe. Expect a preservation order. Don't delete anything." Her hand trembled slightly as she set the phone down. It was over, and worse, it was only beginning. By morning, the story had expanded beyond her. Major newsrooms were tracing the scandal to a network of paid experts who'd offered skewed data and false claims in multiple congressional hearings. One headline dominated the airwaves: "Witness for hire. How political operatives flooded Congress with fabricated testimony." Social media exploded with outrage and fascination. Side-by-side clips of Bondi's fiery opening remarks and her quiet invocation of the fifth flooded timelines. Memes featuring Crockett's poised stare and sharp questioning trended nationwide. Phrases like #receipts ready and #CrockettDocket became digital rallying cries for accountability. In the Capitol, the fallout turned inward. Behind closed doors, the chairman faced a wall of furious Republican colleagues. "We were told she'd been vetted," one member shouted. "Her resume checked out," another snapped. "She just humiliated us in front of the country." A senior lawmaker slammed his folder shut. "If we'd done half the due diligence Crockett's team did, we wouldn't be here." For the first time in years, the rhetoric of partisanship gave way to something else: shame and a reluctant acknowledgement of failure. By that afternoon, the chairman stepped before the press and announced an unprecedented move. All future hearings would be paused pending a full audit of witness verification procedures. The words hit Washington like an earthquake, an admission that oversight itself had been compromised. In her office, Crockett watched the announcement unfold live. Her staff exchanged stunned glances, the gravity of the moment settling in. This wasn't just a political win, it was institutional reckoning. "Everything changes now," her chief of staff said quietly. Crockett nodded, her expression steady. She wasn't celebrating. "This isn't about politics," she replied. "It's about restoring truth to the process." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly over the Capitol dome. Inside, the Congresswoman gathered her notes again, already preparing for what would come next: the investigations, the subpoenas, the scrutiny. For Jasmine Crockett, this was no ending. It was the beginning of a new kind of accountability, one built not on spectacle or sound bites, but on something rarer, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous to the corrupt: proof. Jasmine Crockett had not only uncovered a calculated deception, she had reminded the nation that truth, diligence, and integrity still held real power inside the Capitol. When she walked through the marble halls of Congress the following morning, the energy was entirely different. Lawmakers who had barely noticed her before now stopped to shake her hand. Some offered quiet praise. Others leaned in, curious about how she'd managed to dismantle a case so meticulously built on lies. "The Speaker wants a word this afternoon," her chief of staff informed her as they walked briskly toward her office. "And just so you know, every major news network has requested interviews. CNN, PBS, even Fox wants a sit-down." Crockett nodded, still processing how swiftly everything had changed. What began as a routine oversight hearing had grown into something far greater, a national reckoning about the credibility of congressional testimony. Inside her office, the mood was intense but focused. Her core advisors gathered around a long conference table, laptops open, coffee cups scattered. "This isn't just about one witness," Crockett said, her voice firm and measured. "It's about an organized attempt to manipulate Congress itself. They turned testimony into political theater. Now it's our job to follow the trail, all of it." Her legal counsel adjusted his glasses. "The more we dig, the clearer the pattern becomes. 3 other witnesses across separate hearings, same donors, same editing software, same ghostwriters. It's systematic." Crockett leaned forward. "Then we do this the right way. Facts only. Every document verified. Every source confirmed. We don't need drama. We need proof." Across town, Pam Bondi's world was collapsing. In less than a week, the professional network she had spent years cultivating had begun to crumble. The Florida Bar Association announced an ethics inquiry. Her speaking engagements were quietly canceled. Law firms scrubbed her name from their websites. And the cable network that once championed her analysis had temporarily suspended her appearances. Reporters tracked her to a small private airfield outside Tampa, where cameras caught her hurrying toward a jet, head down, dark glasses hiding her face. The image hit social media instantly, a symbol of retreat, replayed millions of times. Back in Washington, the ripples were growing stronger. Other congressional committees began reopening past hearings, re-examining testimony that once went unchallenged. Fact-checkers discovered more fabricated data, more false witnesses, and a disturbing pattern of partisan influence hiding behind credentialed facades. 2 weeks later, Crockett rose on the House floor to deliver a speech that would soon be replayed across every major network. "What happened wasn't simply one person failing to tell the truth," she said, her tone calm but resolute. "It was a test of whether this Congress values truth over narrative, facts over fiction, accountability over performance." Her words drew rare bipartisan applause. Clips of the speech spread rapidly online, inspiring commentary from across the political spectrum. For many Americans, it was a moment of clarity, a reminder that honesty and evidence could still cut through Washington's noise. Cable hosts, pundits, and editorial boards all agreed. The Crockett-Bondi confrontation had marked a turning point. "This is the new era of oversight," one veteran journalist declared on national television. What Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated is that in a world where everything is digitized, there's no hiding from the facts. Paper trails don't lie. 6 months later, the effects were still unfolding. New verification protocols were introduced, forcing witnesses to submit detailed source documentation before appearing. Several upcoming hearings were delayed when witnesses failed to back up their claims. The Department of Justice widened its investigation to include political consultancies and advocacy groups suspected of crafting misleading testimony for partisan gain. Crockett's reputation soared, not from fiery speeches or social media theatrics, but from a reputation built on precision, evidence, and composure under pressure. Younger lawmakers began seeking her mentorship. Seasoned members, some once dismissive, now asked her opinion on legislative reform. In a televised interview marking 6 months since the hearing, a journalist asked, "Did you have any idea how much this would change things?" Crockett smiled slightly, folding her hands. "What I knew," she replied, "was that our democracy only works if truth matters." Miss Bondi's mistake wasn't just falsifying data, it was assuming no one would verify it. That's not a mistake Washington will repeat anytime soon. The interview went viral within hours, reigniting public conversation about integrity in government. Pam Bondi eventually resurfaced months later, appearing on a sympathetic talk show. She blamed staffing errors and communication breakdowns, insisting the controversy had been exaggerated. But the public had moved on. Her reputation was gone, erased by the same digital footprint that had once amplified her fame. For those inside Washington, the message was unmistakable. In the era of data transparency, every document leaves a fingerprint and every deception a trail. The politics of fabrication no longer stood a chance against the persistence of fact. Across America, millions of viewers who had watched the confrontation unfold drew their own conclusions. Some saw partisan victory, others poetic justice. But most saw something simpler and more profound. Proof that honesty still had defenders, that truth still mattered, and that, even in the roughest corners of political life, integrity could still win. As the narrator's voice closed over the final clip, the screen faded to black. If you believe accountability still has a place in American democracy, the voice intoned, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because stories like this remind us, no matter how loud the noise gets, the truth always finds a way to be heard.